Hey, welcome back to another episode of Buckle Up with Simon and Brian, an ultra running conversation. Simon, how are you this weekend?
I'm doing great. I have been home for about a week now, which has been a while, gearing up for Angeles Crest 100 mile, which is driving distance from where we live. So pretty excited about that before we start hitting the road. And actually, I'm gonna meet you in Colorado very soon. But how about yourself? How are your knees?
Quite honestly, my knees and the rest of my body are a little bit tender. I've been hitting it hard in the mountains lately. I just did, I don't know, maybe three or four, maybe five 14ers in the last couple days, over the weekend. Different routes, different ways. I was on the mountain in the middle of the night. I was in the middle of the afternoon. I'm having a great time exploring. I still have to remember though that Leadville's a running race, and I need to like stick to running as well. I could get really wrapped up into these mountains and kind of forget everything else.
Yeah, I mean, we gotta rest for it. I was racing Tahoe Rim Trail 100 mile in Nevada a week ago. Well, I guess it depends when this episode is coming up. Then Angeles Crest, then Leadville. But at least I have 2 weeks in between these. But our guest today actually decided that that was too much rest, and he's been lining up events. I've actually met him in quite a few races this year: Cocodona, Bighorn, Tahoe Rim Trail, and he just raced last weekend Crazy Mountain.
Our guest this week, Martin Schneekloth, is just knocking things off on his bucket list. He said he shares in our episode. He's got this giant bucket list. Every time he knocks one off, he winds up adding two more to it, which I just love. I love that the bucket list is full. I love having that full bucket. I have a bucket list myself. Martin shares with us stories from this summer, from how he got into sport, and actually where he wants to go in the next couple years and what he's got plans for moving forward. We also talk a little bit about a failure in sport, failure in trying, and the way that DNFs work, and what that feels like and looks like for Martin himself.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I think Martin is a fellow YouTuber, Instagram, and we're all three of us part of the Ultra Aspire team. So his YouTube channel and his Instagram handle is Ultra Crowd, which is easier to say than his family name. So that's what I'm going to be using that. But he's pretty down to earth, and he's done some pretty amazing things. At the same time, he's very relatable. Openly discuss about his shortcoming in some of the race, what happened, and how you can grow from that. So I think that was a discussion that can resonate with a lot of people that are not named Killian, Jim, or Courtney, that are not necessarily always succeeding, but are pushing their own limit. And intrinsically to pushing your own limit, failure is part of that sometimes. And I think this discussion was very helpful in understanding that and overcoming that.
Yeah, I thought it was a really relatable conversation, especially from the DNF side. I do have a couple DNFs on my resume. That there's a there's a method to turning those into learning experiences. Sometimes that's a challenge, but Martin comes from a really cool perspective, and it was great to hear his side of that, and how he sees DNF as not a failure, but it's just as growing pains. Without further ado, here's Martin. Hey, Martin, welcome to the show. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fantastic. How about you guys?
Doing
I'm
good.
doing well.
We're
Yeah,
not on the
doing
road
well.
as opposed to you. I'm living in a full size bed. That feels awesome. I'm home. I love it.
I'm a bit jealous of that, but I'll be there tomorrow. In my home, that is.
Whoa.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, oh, you're coming over. Okay, let me
Wow.
prepare that. Nice.
Martin, you've been challenging yourself with ultra endurance adventures for quite some time now. You've stepped up to the 250-mile distance with Simon and I at Cocodona this year, and and you're all over the place. You're doing great things. You're ton of racing going on. How did you find yourself in this space? How did you get to like Cocodona this year? Where did this start from, and how long have you been in the space of ultra endurance
About
running?
so I've been doing ultra running for about 15 years. I mean, again, it's quite boring how it started, you know. Like a lot of other people, I wanted to run a marathon, right? I wasn't really big into running. I started lunchtime runs with coworkers and kind of stretched the distance, and eventually I wanted to tackle a marathon, a local marathon in Huntsville, Alabama, the Rocket City Marathon, and was doing one of my training races, a 15K, and bumped into a couple of guys, one of them who I played soccer against in a local men's league, believe it or not. And he said, "Hey, why don't you join us for the Dizzy 50s?" I said, "Dizzy 50s, what is that?" He goes, "It's a 50K." I'm like, "What is a 50K?" It's an ultra marathon. I was like not grasping it fully, and basically told him, "Well, wait, if that's longer than a marathon, I'm not interested. I'm training for a marathon right now, so I don't think this is going to work for me." And no, this is going to be great. You know, you can quit anytime. It's just like 3 loops. And basically, I said yes. And you could call that the biggest mistake of my life. But as a result, I've now finished, including this past weekend, 154 ultra marathons. So the reason I've run so many is I have a bit of an addictive personality. I never had any substance abuse problems, but it's when I do something, I'm all in. I've done this with other sports as well. Soccer or football is really the only other sport that I stayed with for a very, very long time. I've done other sports, kickboxing, extreme scuba diving. And for the past 15 years, my focus really has been on ultra marathoning. And I do intend to continue that on for as long as possible. But that's kind of how I got started with ultras. Um, the longer distances, again, it was a natural evolution. You know, I started with 50Ks, then heard about 50 milers, 100Ks, and eventually got roped into attempting a 100 miler a few years, you know, later, a couple years later, and was hooked after that, and really gravitate towards the big mountain races. I've done quite a few desert races as well. Don't really flourish in the desert. Like I said, I prefer the big mountains, cooler temps, lots of ascending, lots of descending. That's kind of my jam. But ultimately, it boils down to trying to see how far I can stretch my endurance and also my abilities, right? Find your limits and then exceed them. That's kind of the plan. And that's really what I'm seeking, the next big adventure, the next big challenge. Um, Sometimes it's a bit more than just another race. Sometimes you want to put some kind of, I don't know, series together for yourself to see, okay, I know I can run 100 miles, but how about doing 200 miles, or how about 600 milers in one summer? Not quite the same as Simon is doing right now, but kind of along those same lines, right? Where you're trying to see, okay, I know I can run 100. How about 200? And you mentioned 250. You know, last year I did 270 in the UK. Attempted and finished the spine race. So always looking for the next big thing and continuing to challenge myself. But ultimately, it's about the adventure as well, right? Seeing all these different landscapes that, unless you're an ultra runner, some people will never get to see because you cannot drive a car up to most of the summits that we get to experience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you should sell yourself short. You've done so many, like the last great. I always say it wrong. I'm gonna ask it as a question instead. Tell us about the big project you've achieved and some big project that are in the way. I mean, I know the answer, but it'd be
Sure,
interesting for you
sure,
to share that.
sure. So in 2019, after many years of trying, I finally get into Western states. Most of us know that that takes quite a while to get into. So when I finally got into that race, I heard about the Grand Slam. So I thought, man, that would be awesome, because who knows if I'll ever get into the Western States again. So as much as my focus was on sub 24 hour, the silver buckle at States, I thought, well, this is going to be my only shot at doing the Grand Slam, which is basically running the 4 oldest 100-milers in the US. Well, as I'm researching how people prepared for it, I found this very obscure blog post, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, but I owe this challenge to him, about what's called the Last Great Race, which is just another version of his slam. And the Last Great Race consists of the 6 oldest 100-milers in the US over the course of 14 weeks, somewhere around that. So you've got, the usual suspects. You've got Western States, Leadville, Wasatch, then you have Angeles Crest, Old Dominion, and Vermont. And so that was 2019. At that time, I had done a few 100-milers in the Southeast mostly. I'd done some races overseas, but this was kind of a true test of, okay, can my body hold up? Can I recover? Do I have the mental fortitude to do that many events in such a short span of time? And I'm happy to report that I was able to do that. And for me personally, speed is all relative, but I was very happy. I earned sub 24s at half of them, and I struggled mightily in the other 3. But it was a great experience. In fact, there was only one other guy that did it that year, and I don't think anyone's done this slam since, and that's Sean Nakamura. So he and I spent about 600 miles together that summer, which, again, as you know, friendships formed on the trails are usually the best friendships, and they're formed for life. So anyway, that was 19. I've tried to do some other things. I tried to do the Triple Crown of 200s, but unfortunately the timing was such that the pandemic happened right in the middle of that. So my first attempt at the 200-mile distance was actually at Bigfoot. Failed there. After 70 miles, I packed it in. I was having severe foot issues. It was, I think, one of the hotter years. It was triple-digit temperatures, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the course, but you have this large lava field pretty early on, between mile 13 and mile 30 or so, and it shredded my feet. I was hydrating by filtering water, but I wasn't getting enough electrolytes. So I was basically bloated with water, and I think that also affected my feet, and just led to blisters very early on that I tried to treat. But eventually I was death marching from mile 40 to 70 through the night and pulled the plug. But again, you learn, you live and learn. I had failed on my first 100-miler attempt as well. And so the next attempt was the Moab 240. That went much better. Not great, but much better. And then eventually I got to do the Tau 200, which to this day is still my best 200-miler performance. I was properly trained. I had some issues early on. As always, I struggle mightily with sleep during 200-milers, but completed that. And so then what's next, right? Because at the time, just 3 years ago, most of the 200s you knew about were the ones put on by Destination Trail Races. So now I needed to look beyond that to see what else was out there. And the Spine Race ended up being one of those events. And then I thought, wouldn't it be a good idea to do the Tour de Jean the same summer? So did the Tour de Jean last summer as well. And then this year, as you guys know, we bumped into each other at Cocodona 250. I was a bit further behind you guys at the finish line, but I think my excuse is going to be that I had done the Southern States 200 3 weeks earlier, and I think my body had not fully recovered, to be for full disclosure here, and sleep was once again my nemesis. We all deal with blisters, or most of us, but sleep deprivation The longer it extends, the slower you get, and that was a big factor for me, especially over 250 miles. You can't run for a week without sleep. It's just not possible.
Doing, sorry. And I think you're also doing 100-mile in every state, right?
Right. So that was, what happens when you're injured or bored, you start thinking up new things, new challenges. And this was kind of the end of last year, which explains the insanity of my race calendar for this year. I was trying to, so what's next, right? I mean, you can't just, I mean, I'm sure you can, but I just figured I can't just keep adding more and more and more races. There needs to be a purpose or a goal, personal goal of some sort attached to it. And unfortunately, I had already done quite a few races, either multiple times or in the same states. But I thought, wouldn't it be neat, rather than just chasing 100 milers, which is, a lifetime challenge in and of itself. How about trying to do 100 miler in every state? And when I decided that, I wasn't even sure if every state had 100 miler, and in fact, I'm not sure every state does. Now, there is a timed event available just about anywhere, but my hope is that I can actually do a proper 100-mile, official 100-mile race in every state. And the only rule I have is that it's an official event, and the state is determined by the start location. Otherwise, you could double dip by running a race through 3 states and go, oh yeah, so I've got these 3 states covered. So the idea is to do that. Of course, it was almost like being a newbie because half of my 100 milers didn't count. They were either double, additionally duplicates or states I'd already covered. So with this weekend, I am now at 19, so I have a very, very long way to go. I hope to still cover a few more states this year. I think I have 6 or 7 more that I can get taken care of this year if all goes well. And I'm dealing with a bit of an injury right now, and I'm not quite sure yet how that's going to affect me, unfortunately.
I'm curious, because in terms of state, there are usual suspects that are easy: Arizona, Utah, California, Colorado. If I'm sure you have one in all of those. What are the
Yes.
states that you're struggling to find a good
The
event for
Northeast,
your
the
challenge?
Northeast is
Northeast?
going to be challenging. Maine has one. I think it's called the Riverlands 100. It sold out in minutes. It's the only 100 miler I believe they have. That would be a challenge. New Hampshire now has the Jigger Johnson 100 miler, which is a monster from what
It's
I've heard.
hardcore.
I can't wait to find out more about that. I want to research that because it does interest me. I've not been up in that area, and I'm kind of excited. The White Mountains, that whole area is new to me, and what better way than to do 100 mile up there to explore that. I traveled through through South Dakota. So there's the Black Hills 100 that I know of. North Dakota, again, it's always great to talk to people on the trail while you're running 100. It told me about an event there, the Matahay 100, which is a point-to-point race that I'd never heard of. So I put that on the list. But yeah, that's the most challenge, the Northeast. And I'm going to be honest, finding a race that's point to point or loop is what I really seek. I like the journey. I'm not a huge fan of multiple loops. I'm hoping I'm not offending anyone, but obviously I can't avoid that. There is races I've done already and that I will have to do that require me to run multiple loops. But to be fair, that's probably much more of a mental challenge for me than the physical challenge. So fair enough, fair point. 100 milers are supposed to be hard, so that may not be a bad thing.
Have you done Hurt in Hawaii? Because I cannot think of 100-mile in Hawaii that wouldn't be a loop,
No,
actually.
no. The Hurt is on the list. Hurt 100. I know you've done it. It's one that is probably going to be, well, it depends. I'll start putting in. I know my wife will be excited to go because she won't have to run,
Yes.
but it's Hawaii.
Mhm.
I thought I had heard of a 100 miler there that loops one of the islands, but I've only heard this rumor. I haven't really seen anything about it. But to be honest with you, as an ultra runner, just like hard rock, just like Western States, of course I'm going to toe the line at Hurt 100. There's no question that I'll do that. Um, and I'll do it because it does scare me. It's not a race that I believe I will finish on the first attempt. And that's purely the terrain that worries
Yeah.
me. The wet terrain, the roots. I just know physically I will struggle with that, but that's not going to deter me. But hopefully, when I do get in, just like hard rock, I'll have time to get ready for it.
Yeah, I mean, Hurt is a beast. And you're right. There might be races on the Big Island. That would make sense. The island is much bigger, so you could
Yeah,
have a course. But Hurt is the Hawaii race. That's the one you
absolutely.
got to do. But
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
a guy like Mike Smith, who has what 200
Yeah,
something, 100
200,
miler,
almost
he
250.
really,
Yeah.
yeah, he really struggled at Hurt. He's always there, always struggles. So it's not the easiest race for sure. But
No,
I'm
no.
sure you can do it. You just
Well,
got to be
we'll
big.
see. I got some. I got chat yesterday. Time is a bit of a blur, but at the finish of the Crazy Mountain 100, I talked to a gentleman from Canada, and his name escapes me now. But he is a veteran of ultras, and he's volunteered. He's run Hurt multiple times, 6 or 7. Same with Hard Rock. So this guy's been around, and he was talking about Mike, who had already left. Mike had run Crazy Mountain 100 as well. That guy, yeah, I think he said the number was somewhere in the 250s now for 100-mile finishers. It's just incredible.
Wow. Yeah. 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 That's pretty cool.
Martin, I wanted to kind of maybe go on a sidestep here and maybe talk about some of the challenges that you've had. You mentioned a couple of DNFs. You're anticipating a potential DNF on your first time at Try and Hurt. Just 2 weeks ago, you had a DNF at Tahoe 100 at the
Mm-hmm.
Tahoe Rim Trail,
Yeah.
TRT 100, and I just saw a recent post where you after finishing this weekend, I think it was last night or today. I'm not. It was
Mm-hmm.
really recent, but you just said like it was good to get redemption and get back on your feet and get moving in the right direction. But I
Right.
wanted to follow that thread a little bit farther deeper and kind of
Sure.
see or ask you how you deal with DNFs and failure in sport and what's your approach to it and how do you find solace in coming out of it besides racing 100 miles the following weekend?
Well, yeah. So it is kind of how I deal with it. To give you an example, my very first attempt at 100 miles was the Penhody 100. I can't even tell you the year, 2010, 11, 12, somewhere in there. It was my first attempt, and I had, for the first and last time, IT band issues. I didn't even know what they were. It happened at mile 50, and by mile 55, I was reduced to a just peg-legged walk, and any incline of 2% I was hurting. I was ready to cry. The pain was that intense. It disappeared 2 days later. It never returned. I don't know why it happened. It's just one of those things. But the point being, I had to pack it in after 60 miles. I hopped in the back of a truck of the parents of the running buddy that had actually convinced me to do it. He ended up finishing, and I saw him at the finish line cheering him in. And I'm sure you guys know how that, well, if you've DNF'd, you know what it feels like to be cheering people in at the finish line. As happy as you are for them, there's quite a bit of FOMO there as well that you did not earn that buckle. And I immediately the next day got onto, I think it was already ultra sign up, but I was looking for a 100 miler as quickly as possible to utilize the training that I had put in already and to get that 100-mile monkey off my back. And that ended up being Rocky Raccoon less than 2 months later in Texas. It wasn't pretty, but it was one of those, okay, you got to finish it this time. You can't, it can't happen again. And I did. And again, my excuse these days and how I deal with it is that, if I finished every race, then really what's the point in doing it? I know this may sound a bit silly, but if we had a guarantee that we were finishing every 100 miler, every 200, every 300 miler, then why would we be doing it? If you knew, if you're an athlete, a competitive athlete, and if you knew you were going to win every single time, would you continue to do it? Would you continue to train? What's the challenge, right? I mean, we all have different reasons, but I certainly am a highly competitive person. Uh, in the past, when I was younger, very competitive with everyone around me, and these days, mostly competitive with myself, right? The goal is to get across that finish line. I'm not chasing a 32 or 33 or 34-hour finish. It does not matter. The goal is to get across that finish line. When that doesn't happen for various reasons, there's that inner dialogue going on, and during the race and after the race. And I always say, and I don't know if I'm the only one or not, right? And sometimes you find out people say, oh yeah, I feel that way too. But I only feel as confident and as strong as my last ultra performance as it pertains to ultra running, right? So I can finish 100 milers. I can have 50 sub 24-hour finishes. When I have a DNF, none of that matters anymore. At that point, I'm not going to say I feel like a failure, but I feel like I failed myself, right? It's that kind of pressure you put on yourself. Nobody else cares. It's you and you alone. You set up this challenge for yourself and you failed for whatever reason. And failure, again, I don't mean this in a negative way, but you did not fulfill the goal that you set yourself. So to me, the challenge after that is to accept that, and that can be quite challenging. I engaged with my wife afterwards. I talked to her during the race. I called her up and I talked to her afterwards, because it is, you want to bounce it off someone, of a person that you trust, to let them verbalize what you're thinking, what you're struggling with, and just having someone listen. It's not even someone telling you this is what you should do, just you allowing yourself to kind of verbalize what you're dealing with, and then getting maybe a nudge from that person that you're talking to of, for example, as my wife did, just don't make any rash decisions now. Take 24 hours, get some sleep, and then see what you want to do. No reason to make any decisions now. Because I was at that point, right? I DNF'd. It was, I'm not sure if you knew, but the TRT had nothing to do with physical issues at all. It was all in my head. And it's not that I just didn't want to be there. And I was out there. I was overlooking Lake Tahoe. I had been there before. I knew how beautiful it was. I was calling my wife, telling her, I don't understand it. I just don't want to be here. And I'm looking at this beautiful landscape, at these beautiful mountains. I'm physically fine. Everything's great. I'm not struggling. But, I was struggling mentally. I just did not want to be out there. And I used all the tools available, the usual things. All right, let's get some more calories. Let's sit down in an aid station. Let's make it to the next aid station before we decide. Let's make it one more aid station before we decide. And ultimately, I sat down again after I did all that and said, I just didn't want to keep going. And I had to accept that. I could have kept walking. I've done it before. I mean, this is not, we all have those struggles at various points in a 100-mile race, or any race, any ultra marathon for that matter. But I just didn't want to at that time. So really, to me, it's allowing yourself to have those feelings and those thoughts, not be too hard on yourself, which is very hard. Initially, you will be hard on yourself. At least I am. But, allowing yourself to forget about it for a moment, take a deep breath, get some sleep, get some rest, and see how you feel in a day or maybe 2 days, and then reassess and decide. And that's what I did. And that's why I ended up going to Crazy Mountain 100 and finishing it.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point about not being too hard on yourself. I see both extreme. I see people like, I think we live in a society where we don't accept so well failure. Failure is something to avoid, and obviously you should strive to not fail. But I think if you try anything ambitious, inherently you will fail sometimes. At work, for example, we set ourselves corporate goal and department goals, and the the meat is to reach 70% of your goals, which the other way to say it is that 30% of these goals were too ambitious and you fail. And that feels bad,
Right.
and your boss will chew you up and you'll feel you'll lose your job. And I think with ultra running, it's the same. There are people that will say, DNF did not fail. And I think you shouldn't feel too bad about failing,
Right.
but you should also not, I don't know, you should not make excuse. You should sit down and think, okay, what the heck happened here and how can
Right.
I grow from this? I obviously had goals to cross that finish line. I did not. Why didn't I manage to do that? What can I do differently next time so that it does not happen? And your point about not being in a race, we met there, right? And I don't know if you dropped shortly after that, but you definitely didn't seem to be in the mood, is how I would describe
Yeah.
it. And
Right.
I was feeling like that at Bighorn, 100%. I totally relate to what you said. I was at Bighorn. It was a great race. People were nice scenery, and I was really thinking, I just don't want to be here. Like, it's not the race, it's me. I know it, and there's really nothing driving me forward. I'm in pain right now, and I'll be in pain until tomorrow afternoon, unless I quit. And the difference between your situation and my situation, and we talked about it after the race, is, well, for me, Nora was at the 50-mile mark. So of course I'm
Yeah.
gonna, go meet my wife. She drove there, so I'm gonna meet her at least. And once
Yeah.
she's with me, I was like, well, shit, I'm not gonna drop on Nora. Like,
Yeah.
she's pacing me, so it
Yeah.
kind of drove me forward. But otherwise, what do I have to prove? People know I can do 100-mile. So
Right.
why am I doing that? I'm not gonna win. I'm not having fun. I already saw the course. then
Yep.
then, then the quitting option is there, and I think that's what happened to you, and I'm glad to hear that it was not an injury, because we talked a little bit about that, and I'm curious how Crazy Mountain went, because now you
Yeah.
refer to an injury, so it seems that it was
Yeah.
not physical at Tahoe, but there seemed to be something physical a little bit.
Yeah. So this there'll be another little nugget here that I'm interested in hearing your guys' thoughts on that as well. So I came out of TRT 100 with an injury that I wasn't aware of until a day later. Um, my left Achilles had swollen to twice the size, just above the ankle bone. So not at the bottom where it attaches, but kind of up higher, I guess, like a high ankle area. And it was sore to the touch, but it did not hurt too bad while walking. I was able to hike, which is what I did, but I didn't run between TRT and the Crazy Mountain. Of course, I mean, with a week in between, you shouldn't be running much at all, anyways, recovery wise. But anyway, the Achilles was not happy. I don't know what the cause is. I've never had issues with that before, so I treated it with ice. I treated it with a topical gel, and I used some ibuprofen. And I did that pretty diligently for the entire week, keeping my fingers crossed that I can toe the start line and finish the race. Now, I was absolutely committed by Wednesday that I was going to go to Montana and do that race, but I did not know what my Achilles would do, right? It's one of those things where once you commit, and if you're okay to walk, and you don't think there's serious damage yet, you feel at least you should give it a good shot, an honest attempt, anyways. And I did. It was a great race, great atmosphere. Everything I expected a Montana race to be. It was hosted. The start and finish area were hosted by local ranchers. There was an amazing setup there with a big spread of food and drink. The aid stations were amazing. Temperatures did not worry me too much. It was about 10 or so degrees cooler at lower elevations than it was at TRT. And at TRT, I didn't really struggle with the heat either. So in any case, it's a true mountain race. I'm not sure how much you guys have looked into Crazy Mountain 100, but I had never raced in Montana. I'd done a race, of course, in Wyoming. I'd done a race in Idaho. I suspected it to be similar. And it is some serious mountains, and there's some seriously technical trails there. Great layout, challenging climbs, to be sure. I think it's close to 23,000 feet of gain. But again, climbing does not scare me. It's usually, my feet can be giving me problems on the descending. I struggle with blisters in the same areas every time. I try to address it, deal with it. I've tried just about everything in the book. But at this point, it's almost one of those, well, let's see how long I can avoid them because it's going to happen eventually, and then you just have to deal with it. Anyway, speaking of the injury, no issues. I was running fine. I forgot all about it. And we ended up doing the second big climb. There's 4 big climbs in the middle of the race, 4 mountain passes, and then they're sandwiched in between less severe climbs, yet still plenty of up and down and plenty of climbs. So we were doing the second of 3, which you actually do twice. It's kind of an out and back between aid stations, about 11 miles one way and then 11 miles back again. So you're climbing for 5 miles, you descend for 5, you climb for 5, you descend for 5. Well, 5 miles in, I get to the summit of a pass, and I sit down and I open a little Ziploc bag of gummy bears, just kind of enjoying the view and getting some sugar. And I have a drink, I take some video footage, and as I get up, I feel a searing pain in the Achilles. And that was not good. That was probably the worst spot to feel an injury that you didn't know how severe it is, right? All I knew is, oh man, I felt it. Is this permanent? Is this just because I'm getting up, like a sore muscle? What's going on? As I kept moving down the mountain, it kind of dissipated a little bit, but it was just always there. And so I get down to the aid station. I'm contemplating, am I considering dropping because of the injury? Is there more to it? Am I just not tough enough? Am I trying to find a reason to quit? And I get down to the aid station and I see a fellow runner who is considering quitting. And I don't know why, but when he said that, I was like, all right, let's get out of here in about 2 minutes, right? I grabbed some food, he got ready, and I got him out of there. And really, it was almost one of those, I don't know, selfless acts, but I wasn't really thinking even about my heel in that moment. I just heard him say that he's thinking about dropping. I said, no, come on, let's both get out of here, and we keep moving. We kept moving. I could tell, 10 minutes later that he was moving way better than me. So I basically gave him a couple of nudges and said, hey, listen, man, you're moving way better than me. Just keep crushing, and I'll see you at the finish line. So he took off, and I continued my slow slog up the mountain to return to the aid station that we came from. Now, that's a no-drop aid station, and I kind of knew that. But when I got there, I was really afraid to continue on. My feet, I was trying to compensate for the Achilles, kind of trying to protect it a little bit. So then I started getting knee pain on the right side. I'm thinking it was the IT vent on the right side. My feet were starting to really hurt, the balls of the feet, the heels, just everything was just starting to feel off. But I had no choice but to self-extract even at the next aid station because they bring everything in on horseback. So I knew I get there, I'll hit the reset button, and then I'll self-extract the shortest way out of there based on what they tell me. So I sit down, I talk to the medics, I tell them, we don't need to take the shoes off. It's a mess in there, let's not touch it. I know I said you guys can't take me out of here, I'm going to get myself out of here, but what's the shortest way? And the response was, the shortest way is continuing on to the next aid station over the 4th of the 4 big mountain passes. That's obviously not what I wanted to hear. I was hoping there's some kind of 5-mile downhill out of here. That was not the case. So talked to the medics, got some food, and this is the kind of the topic that I usually feel very strongly about. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. But they offered medication, Tylenol or NSAIDs, whatever I wanted. And my first response was absolutely not. I don't know if you guys ever paid attention to the Western state studies, or more than 10 years ago, they were publishing some studies around NSAIDs and, different pain meds and how they can be detrimental, especially when you're running ultra distances, when you're dehydrated and so forth. So I made it a point, not just in running, but also in life, to at all costs avoid any kind of pain pills because I feel they mask something that you should be aware of. There's a reason you're feeling that pain. But because I had to self extract and it was another 8 miles to the aid station, I figured, okay, this is more of a, making it a bit easier for me to get myself out of there, right? Normally you hop on a bus and a shuttle or whatever, you go back, you
Mm-hmm.
collect your DNF. But I still had 8 miles to cover. That would probably take me 3-4 hours or more, depending on my pace. So I accepted the Tylenol and sat around for 15 minutes and then got myself out of there. So apparently I end up in the toughest section on the course with that climb. It's a bunch of scree and shale, I guess is what they call it. And it's what I would call the death drop, where literally I had to have a couple of female runners coax me across because I literally stood there like, I can't cross this. I'm going to fall down the mountain. It was literally, you kind of had to sidestep. And if you were losing balance or your footing, you would literally slide down the mountain. And it's only a 10-foot section, but you have to get across that. And anyway, I make it across that nightmare. And I talked to these ladies that I didn't know. It was dark. I had no idea who they were. I still don't know who they are. And I was like, man, this is awful. I don't ever want to do this again. And then I realized, wait a minute, if I'm dropping out, I'll have to do this again if I want to come back for redemption. And so I'm talking to the ladies. They don't know who I am. I'm like, man, maybe I should finish. Maybe I shouldn't drop. My feet are feeling pretty good now that I had a couple of Tylenol. Let's just see if I can't keep going. What should I do? And like any guy, and you guys know this, any guy would go, you should finish. You should just go for it. And these ladies were like, well, we don't know. We don't know if you should continue. And I had this, it was really just, again, me thinking out loud. And basically, I decided right then and there, okay, this is it. I don't want to do this section again. I know I would have to if I DNF this race. So let's just keep going. And that's what I ended up doing. And I did get help from medics again, meaning I took another couple of Tylenol, and that's kind of the point that I'm getting at. I don't normally do that. I've done it once before. That was at the Spine race in England. In fact, they make you, if I remember correctly, it's one of the mandatory kits that you have to keep. As I can't say it, the medical term, but it's basically like Tylenol, right? They have you carry a certain amount with you in case you have any kind of issues. They do have they have doctors there if you need serious medical help, but they don't usually give you over the counter anything. If you need it, they suggest you carry it with you. But anyway, the point is, I feel like I doped by taking a couple of Tylenol twice. Now, granted, I don't compete for any podiums, but I did. It is kind of a. I'm just curious to hear what you guys think about that. Like, we don't have to get into weed or any of the harder drugs, but I'm just curious how you feel about those types of things: Tylenol, ibuprofen, or topical, anything like that that potentially helps you continue a race. I know a lot of runners do it. A lot of runners do it from the start. They take whatever arthritis meds, or they feel they need to pop pain pills regularly during an ultra to keep going. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, that's a great story, Martin. Thanks for sharing it. I will try my best to address those things. I think what I hear, or I'm sorry. I think what I hear, Martin, is that um, you have not allowed yourself to do that in the past, and you're having a little bit of a struggle with it now. And I think that's like just your boundary that you set for yourself, regardless
Right,
if it's over the counter or not, or if
right,
it's
right.
whatever it is, right? But that's the boundary that you set for yourself, and if it sounds like you're struggling with that a little bit, you're a little uncomfortable with it. My boundaries are a little bit different than that. I have taken ibuprofen a lot of times in an event. and I know we kind of frown upon ibuprofen in events. I think Tylenol is more socially acceptable now than ibuprofen, but essentially they're both over the counter
Of course. Yeah.
NSAIDs. They just have different effects on the internals of her body. My wife is a
Yep.
nurse. She won't allow me to take too much, or she allows me to take it in small doses, and she monitors how many times I take them in that same event. So no more than the prescribed amount,
Right.
and
Right.
maybe
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
even padding that with a couple extra hours, because
Right.
my kidneys are working pretty hard to
Yep.
process all the other things going on in my body. So I'm okay with it. I don't really. I guess with all that said, it's pretty obvious that I don't really see it as being doping or anything along
Right.
those lines.
Right.
I'm
Right.
not
Right.
using it. I guess I'm not using, or I'm not abusing any substances. I'm
Right.
using it as needed, if needed at all. Sometimes, I mean,
Yeah.
I can remember races where I haven't taken any at all,
Right.
and so I think there, it's only as an as needed basis.
Right.
If I tripped and
Yeah.
fell, or if I sprained my ankle, or something along those lines, and I'm trying to walk it off. That's my
Yeah.
take on it, Martin. But I can appreciate your take as well. I appreciate the fact that you want to be a little more pure and be
Well,
conscientious
but
of what you put in your
again, right?
body.
I mean, I've done it now a couple of times, right? So maybe I think my barrier has come down a little bit as well, because I've realized that, a little bit, just to me, it's almost like taking the edge off. I know that sounds like like I'm taking hard drugs, but it did take a bit of that, that intense pain down a notch, which is all it took for me to be able to continue. And I certainly could appreciate that. Again, um, I'm not a professional athlete. I do this for my own benefit. I guess the struggle, or the thought is always, well, would I have been able to finish it without taking it? Now, I believe I could have, right? But again, it's an internal dialogue, nothing else, right? I'm always curious to hear other people's thoughts on it. I know it used to be way more prevalent that people would take it. I know people that take it without even needing it right off the bat. Like you said, as needed, I'm okay with. That's kind of how I feel about it these days. But I just still wonder why some people take it at the start and then literally like, okay, I can take this many per 24 hours and that's what I'm going to do.
Mm.
Right. But sorry, Simon, I would love to hear too what you have to say on that.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I have my 2 cents here, and for those who are not close to my background, I do have a PhD in biomedical science. I was a pharmacist in Canada. I would still be a pharmacist if I was still in Canada. So I kind of know medicine. And the first thing that we need to clear out is Tylenol is not an NSAID. That's
Right. Right.
inaccurate. NSAID would be ibuprofen, so Advil or Motrin, and also naproxen. Aleve, I think is the commercial name in the US,
Yep.
whereas
Yep.
Tylenol is a different kind of painkiller. So that's
Correct.
a big difference. And the big distinction for me is that there's two things I think about. And I can start by saying I don't take either of them during a race. That's a personal choice, but it's the first part about doping is pretty clear to me. There is a clear, exhaustive list by the World Anti-Doping Agency that lists every medicine that you're not allowed to take, and some of them will be you're not allowed to take it at all, including training, and some of them will be during events. And if a race has different rules than that, then my take is doping is taking one of these substances. If it's in there, you're doping. Even if you think that's not doping, you are indeed doping. And the classic example for that, and I really don't mind that people do it, but by definition, you are indeed doping, is testosterone. A lot of guys are on TRT. Testosterone is listed as a substance you're not allowed to use. It's considered doping. You can say it's not helping me. It's a small dose. It's prescribed by a physician. It really doesn't matter. It's part of
Yeah.
the list that says if you're taking that, you're doping. You can have a medical exemption, but unless you have a medical exemption, you are doping, and you won't get the medical
Right.
exemption for TRT. That's just not one of the reasons. Like testicular cancer would be a reason, not I'm older and I need TRT. Now, do I mind that people are doing TRT and racing? Absolutely not.
No.
Like, go ahead, do
Right.
it. It's silly. You're a mid packer. You're not stealing anyone's prize. Like, go ahead and do it. I think the rules should be different, but since the rules are what they are, you are technically doping, and I really don't care. So for Tylenol or Advil, like for Tylenol or for NSAIDs, as far as I know, they're not part of the list, but the race like UTMB, you're not allowed to have NSAIDs. And it's not because it's considered doping, it's because it's considered unsafe. And if you take Advil,
Yep.
if you take naproxen in a race, you're risking kidney failure. Most likely,
Yep.
nothing will happen, but there will be that one guy out of 1,000 that will have extreme kidney failure and could die out of that. So they say don't
Yep.
do it. And my general recommendation is don't do Advil during a race. In recovery, if you have inflammation in your Achilles, like you had, I would say that's probably a good idea to do. Ice, compression, and Advil is probably smart. Tylenol would be okay in a
Yep.
race. If you had to worry about something, it would be like Brian said, don't overdo it. 4 gram a day is the
Right.
maximum. Don't take
Of
more than
course.
that, otherwise
Yeah.
you'll
Yeah.
have liver failure and you'll die. So that's
Oh, yeah.
also not good to die of liver
Yep.
failure. But that's my take. It's if someone does it, I don't think you should feel bad about it. Like the drug that I abuse, which is not part of the list of doping, is Imodium. I'm gonna shit myself if I don't take it. Would I finish a race without it? I would probably finish a race without it, but it would be less pleasant. I'm not winning anyway, so I'm gonna pop them like
Yep.
candies. Like, why not? So if you're
Yep.
struggling, you need it, and it's not doping. Fuck, man, do it. Like, don't feel bad about it. You're still running 100 mile,
Yep.
and the reality
Yep.
is that part of the effect that you're feeling in terms of pain is also just placebo. So it is your mind also helping you cope with the pain. Yeah, the medicine helps,
Yep.
but also there's a placebo effect that your mind is stronger than you realize, and it's saying, okay, like I'm trying to suppress the pain, let's suppress the pain, and that's it. So
Yep.
I honestly don't think you should feel bad about taking Tylenol. I think people
No.
should be
Yep.
careful about taking Advil in a race. That's my take, really.
Yeah. Right. And I just figured I'd bring it up because I did do it. I don't normally do it. I did think about it, right? You just feel like, okay. But at the end of the day, the most thing I'm concerned about, the reason I don't take naproxen or ibuprofen is because of the effect that it can have on the kidneys. Tylenol, and it's because I told them no. They said, well, Tylenol is not that. You can take that safely as long as you stay within the limits, 2 every 6 hours, no more. I went 8 or 9 hours, whatever, again, to have a little buffer there. It's really more about my health, right? But I was
Yeah.
curious because to me, that is a topic, should be a topic of discussion for people that abuse it. And when I say abuse it, meaning taking it as a, what is it called? Beforehand, as a, what's the word
Prophylactic.
I'm looking for? Yes, right? To me, that is a problem, and that should be talked about more. I'm not so sure a lot of people even know about the Western State study because it hasn't really been talked about since it came out more than 10 years ago. But to me, that's some of the great stuff that some of those organizations have done in ultra running and that I feel should still be talked about more. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on that. I was curious to see what you guys thought about that.
The Western State study is really in depth. I do remember when that came out, and as a coach in the coaching of endurance athletes and ultra running, we still use it as a reference point for a lot of data. That they did an extensive study on hundreds and hundreds of athletes at their event over the course
Yeah.
of something like 5 years. And so the medical one was significant, or the medical
Yeah.
findings were significant as well as other
Yeah.
things, as like the sleep beforehand and how many calories people were taking and
Yeah.
sodium intake. I mean, all the things they did. It was really, really extensive and very valuable tool that some of us still use. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you mentioning that and bringing it up and broaching the topic of
Yeah.
NSAIDs and
And how are your Achilles now? I mean, that's a problem that I struggle with very often. They get swollen, both of them. It's not localized like you. It's the whole thing, twice the size, very painful. Goes away in 2-3 days,
Yeah.
and I don't have a secret to
It's
solve it. Like it's just really bad.
yeah. So I'm gonna be arriving home tomorrow, right? So I am lucky to be running. My core running group includes two two orthopedic surgeons as well as a cardiologist. So I have all my bases covered there. So the idea is that they'll be invited to a beer and I'll basically pick their brain of what the best approach is. Now, I already know the answer. Even those running nuts will tell me you should probably take a break. But we'll see. I just want to make sure it's nothing serious. But yes, Simon, it's swollen, right? And it's not. It doesn't keep me from walking. It's not painful now. It's just. It is painful to the touch. If I press on it, right, it hurts. And of course, they'll tell me don't press on it. But it's again, it's swollen.
They are
It
doctor. They are
shouldn't be
the smart
swollen.
one.
So we'll see. I have an event in 2 weeks that I may pull out of if that's the right thing to do. I don't know yet. I again want to play it by ear. I have Swiss Peaks in 5 weeks. 5 weeks. There's some other personal reasons around our house. There's some construction going on that may keep me from going to Switzerland due to timing. But right now, I'm more focused on the injury, trying to figure out, is this severe? Do I have to worry about it? Or is it one of those, let the pain be your guide? To me, that's my favorite injury because they're not telling you not to work out. They're just telling you to stop if it hurts. So if that's the case, then I'm less worried. But if the Achilles, again, I've never dealt with an Achilles injury before. If there's other risks I need to worry about, then I'd rather know beforehand before I make it any worse, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Brian might have more experience with some of his athletes doing that, but my take on it is if it's very localized and you can pinpoint where it is, there's a risk that you have a slight tear, which would be very problematic. If it gets chronic, it can also be problematic because your Achilles could snap someday. Usually, they say it's riskier to don't go play basketball basically. But running, since it's a very repetitive and not too high impact, it's not as bad. But it can happen, and I know people that had that happen and had to have surgery, reconstructive surgery. So you really don't want to have chronic inflammation there. And my take is ice, rest, stretch, these sorts of things. Massage potentially the calf, but the long-term solution is the reinforcement of the calves through a strength training session, which is probably what a physiotherapist would say. But
oh yeah, and that's and again, I played soccer for 40 years, almost 40 years.
You played soccer or football? How do you actually say it?
Well, I say football or Fußball, but I Americanized it. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yes.
Proper football. But so the legs have never been an issue for me. I've been able to, even ankle injuries, come back from pretty quickly. But like I said, Achilles, that's a new one. They both look a bit swollen now. They don't hurt. I'm hoping it's just, inflammation, like the kind of inflammation we sometimes deal with after doing big races. But I'll find out. If worse comes to worse, I'll have it checked out by one of the guys I run with and get a proper diagnosis, not a Google diagnosis, or WebMD, and move on from there. I'm not too concerned. I've had worse problems to deal with. But with something like Swiss Peaks, as I'm sure Simon, you can relate with Tour, that's a big race. That's not just, a local race. There's lots of travel and logistics involved. So I kind of I don't want to make a decision yet. I'm just going to wait because I can't get my money back anyway. So I may as well hold off to make a decision and a call on that. And because it is a fun adventure that I'd hate to miss. So we shall see.
Yeah, my recommendation is similar to what you guys just explained, is to use your running group buddies that are doctors and professionals, or seek out a professional in the space that understands ultra running and understands the stress that we already put on our bodies on a normal basis.
Oh
so
yeah.
they have a better grasp of, like, instead of just having the old time local doctor tell you to stop running, that's just pretty much not an option, right? So
Yep.
yeah, just seek out a specialist that understands ultra running and understands what you've done, and maybe can listen to a little bit of history that you've completed, 150 plus ultra
Yeah.
marathons and all
They
that kind of
they
stuff.
know.
So it sounds like you got some decision making coming up between the event the next 2 weeks, and then you got Swiss Alps in a couple weeks after that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to follow along your journey and see where it takes you. Any other, like, bigger projects in mind ahead, like that you've already been scheming up for next year, or like a 5 year
Um,
plan in the ultra running
I
space?
I have one big event on the calendar for January. That's completing the double of the spine. Basically, I'm going to be doing the winter spine in January. I did the summer spine and ended up running with a few folks that had done the winter spine. And believe it or not, I know some people may disagree, but they considered the summer spine to be more difficult. So I guess it should be easy for me to do the winter spine, but I'm kidding, of course. But it's a winter event. It's the first event that it's not quite your Alaska type winter event, but it is a winter event. The conditions, even in the summertime, can be pretty harsh in the UK because you deal with just gale force winds and rain and just all the fun stuff. Lots of darkness. So it'll be a new challenge for me. I like the gear intensity of it, the planning, the spreadsheets, because you literally have support every 100K. So you're truly self-supported for 100K at a time, which is a lot of fun to me. It's different. It's more of a expedition than it is a race. And I struggled mightily last year, but I enjoyed it immensely as well. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm keeping my calendar open. There's a few lotteries. I'm approaching 10 years of trying to get into hard rock. Um, if I don't get into hard rock, which is just fair to assume anyway, I'll plan to have another busy year. But if I get into hard rock, it'll be the focus of the year. It's one of the few races where, because, there's this joke I tell people, my running friends, that I actually ended up getting my AARP card before I got into hard rock, which is kind of funny and sad at the same time. But the point being is I live at 700 feet. This race takes place at a much higher altitude than that. So I would have to really prepare for it because I have no intentions of not finishing it on the first try. So that's that. Again, it's unusual for me to not have a full schedule already for next year. I've got some ideas. I always try to go to Europe once or twice if I can. PTL attracts me. I've already been scheming with a couple of friends if they're interested in doing that. TDS interests me. I've done UTMB 3 times, so I may not want to enter the lottery and just sign up straight up for the PTL or TDS instead. There's a lot of races I still want to do. The French one, Simon, you probably heard of that one, Grand Raid La Réunion on Reunion Island.
Yeah, I'm doing
That
it this
is
year.
really challenging. Oh, there you go. Yeah, I should have known that. I would have tried to sign up as well because I don't speak French, and I know you need to at least either have someone that does or learn it. But it's one of the races that is also quite the logistical challenge. So I may need to pick your brain, Simon, when you come back, if you don't mind. But yeah, that's
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I
Pretty
can
open
teach you the
schedule.
usual
I've got.
French. All you need to know in French is oui, oui, baguette, ménage à trois. Then you're good to go.
Yeah, sounds good. What about beer, though? I need to know how you say that.
Beer? Yeah.
Yeah.
But
There
I
you
think
go.
that would be a faux pas. I think you have to ask for wine. So vin.
Wine. Yeah, I figured.
Yes.
Otherwise, I give it away. That I'm not from there.
Yeah.
Okay, got you.
Awesome. Well, I mean, these are a pretty cool plan for sure, and we'll follow up. Finger crossed for Hard Rock. Um, if you want a real challenge, go to Ure 100 instead. It's more climbing. Brandon and I know about it,
Yeah,
so
Yeah, I explored that area during Hard Rock Week. I went up to Twin Peaks, and I had Walt Handloser give me a little tour and point out every peak you climb during Uray. Um,
He's a
I'm,
good
I'm
tour guide, I'm
made.
sure.
Yes, he's a great tour guide. So Uray 100 is one of those I'm intimidated by and very interested in. The high fives. I don't know if you guys heard of
Hmm.
that one yet. I'm very interested in that one. I've got a friend attempting that, who told me I should give it a go. Actually, two friends have told me now to give it a go. The 200 milers, I'm not done with those yet. Summit 200 is something that was mentioned to me that should be interesting. So I need to check that out. The list is endless, right? I do have a bucket list on my blog that I started like 15 years ago, and I try to keep checking races off. And as I check one off, I add two more. So I think it's a lifetime bucket list that I'll never be able to finish, but it's not going to keep me from trying.
What would you do, Martin, if your bucket list, if you just knocked it all out and next week the bucket list was just completely checked off? What would you find yourself doing?
I'd find myself a new sport. And I don't mean this in a I would quit running, but there's things I still want to learn. But I'm just too busy running. I know that sounds stupid, but I would love to learn and earn mountaineering skills. I'd love to learn skimo. Um,
Hmm.
all these things to me, climbing, all that kind of what it become a true mountain athlete, I guess is what I'm getting at. I'm not interested in chasing the seven summits or anything crazy like that, but I would love to become more competent in the mountains. Um, I don't fool myself into believing because I can run mountain trails or mountain races that I can survive in the mountains. I would love to learn some of the skills, understand the environment better. So that's something I would focus on. If I were to complete my bucket list tomorrow, I would become a newbie mountaineer or a newbie climber, or a newbie skier.
I absolutely love it, Martin. That's a great answer. Um, Gosh, it was so nice to catch up with you again. I know that we've been on the same team with Ultraspire for quite a long time now. I think
Yes.
since the pandemic, if not before.
Oh,
I think
before then, yeah.
I think we got a new team member with us here too. I think maybe Simon is on
Yeah,
the
I
team now.
Yeah,
saw
I,
that.
I
Somebody
actually
got
just
a.
got my package. I'm so
I
happy.
saw
I
that. I
finally
saw
have my
that.
stuff. I'm gonna test it next race. Gonna test it at Tour du Mont Blanc self support. So really excited to be joining the team and testing
Yeah,
that gear. I mean, it's good. It's good stuff. I was already using quite a lot of them, but now it's a little bit more official.
yeah.
So I'm part of you guys now.
Let let us know if you before you get more gear sent. If you get any questions, I'm sure Brian and I have tried most of it already, pack wise and lights
Hmm.
wise. But yeah, lots of good stuff to use there, man. I was all decked out this past weekend at Crazy Mountain as well, so that's what got me through the night as well.
It was great again to catch up with you, Martin. I appreciate your time. We'll follow you and all your accolades. Where can our listeners follow you at?
Okay, so I'm on all the usual platforms. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram, Ultra Kraut, at Ultra Kraut, and then I have a tiny little YouTube channel, Ultra Kraut Running, where I usually post race videos and the occasional training video otherwise. But Facebook under my name, Martin Schneekloth as well. But yeah, that's it.
Well, thanks again, and we wish you the best of luck and best of success, and we hope you speedy recovery.
Thank
Take
you very
care.
much. It was great talking to you guys.
Great chatting, Martin. I'm Simon, and that's Brian.
We'd be thrilled to connect with you beyond our show.
For all of your endurance coaching requirement, you can reach out to Coach Brian at altitudeendurancecoaching.com.
To explore more of Simon's content, visit Running with Simon on YouTube.
Don't forget to rate, like, and share our content regularly.
Your support means a lot to us. Thanks.